So, this is my Yosenju Kaiju deck profile. It's a nice, fun budget deck to play. Most of these cards are either printed in common or have had reprints recently, so they're not as expensive to play. Don't get me wrong, some of the cards that I do play in here are a little bit pricey, but for the price of the other cards, it really pays off. So, this is our current lineup. We are playing 3 Karma 1. So, for those of you who are new to the deck, all of the Yusenju cards have the same, all of the number Yusenju cards, have the same effect. When they're normal summoned, they can normal summon another Yusenju monster other than itself from hand immediately after. So Yusenju 1 specifically, if you control another Yusenju monster, you can target a monster on your opponent's side of the field and return it to hand. That has great synergy with the Kaijus, which we'll be going into later. Next, we'll be playing 3 copies of Surprise Surprise, Yusenju Karma 2. So, what Yusenju Karma 2 does is exactly the same as Karma 1. When it's normal summon, you can normal summon another Yusenju monster other than itself from hand. Whilst you control another Yusenju monster though, this card can attack your opponent directly and it'll only do half of the life points. So it's important that you note that it only does half the life points, not half its original attack, because you will be playing another card in this deck which will be boosting its attack. We'll go into that later. We also play 3 Yusenju Karma 3. Like the others, they all have the effect where when summoned, it'll summon another Yusenju monster from hand. Normal summon, might add, that normal summon is really, really particular because it gets around things like floodgates to prevent you from special summoning. So that is really important. What Karma 3 does though is if another Yusenju monster other than itself inflicts battle damage to your opponent's life points, you can search for another Yusenju card from your deck. All Yusenju monsters, I forgot to mention, return to your hand at the end phase, so none of them like to stick around. This isn't the case if they get their effects negated, so if someone drops a Veiler on your Yusenju, it's not going to come back to hand at the end of the turn. That is a bit of an issue, but it doesn't come up too often. People aren't normally that worried about Veilering Yusenjus. So next up on our Yusenju list, we are playing 3 Yusenju Izna. This was recently, well, I say recently, this was printed not too many sets ago, and it's a nice addition to the Yusenju set. So what Yusenju Izna does is, because it's not a number Yusenju, is when you normal summon it, it won't allow you to normal summon another one. That's not one of its effects. But it does have some other really important effects, which is why we play it at 3. What it allows you to do is you can discard it from hand. For the rest of the turn, your opponent cannot respond to Yusenju's normal summon effects. This is great. That means your opponent can't strike, or judgment, or warning. Your Yusenju summons, they can't negate it with monster effects, they can't Veiler, they can't Imperm, they can't do nothing. So it lets you build up your board. The other effect it has is when there is another Yusenju monster on the field, you can draw a card, which is always nice. You never know, you might draw into one of your Kaijus. You can only activate one of each effect. So if you discard it from hand to prevent your opponent from reacting to Yusenju normal summons, then you're not able to use its other effect. If you had to in hand, you wouldn't be able to use its other effect to draw a card. But it's definitely worthwhile playing at 3 to be able to build up your board and break through your opponent's defenses. Next up, this is the last Yusenju card that we play. We're only playing 2 Sujik. I'd even consider cutting this down to 1, to be honest, because Sujik's a bit lackluster. But what it does do is you can like Isna, it won't allow you to normal summon another Yusenju monster because it's not a Yusenju number monster, but it will allow you to, if it's on the field with another Yusenju monster, it can target that Yusenju monster and boost its attack by 1,000. Alternatively, if this is in hand, you can discard it during the damage calc to boost the damage by 1,000. So it's important to remember the discarding effect, because there are times that comes up where you have to choose between summoning Isna and summoning Sujik, and there are times where you will draw into your Sujik after summoning all of your Yusenjus. So that's something worthwhile noting. Next up, we have our Kaiju lineup. So we are playing 2 Dogoran. So it's really important that we're playing this lineup of Kaijus, and I'll explain later. So the effects of the Kaijus aren't particularly important. The important thing is that they tribute your opponent's monsters to summon themselves. That's the big part. You're not allowed to control more than one Kaiju, which means if you tribute your opponent's monster with a Kaiju, you can't then follow it up with another tribute of another Kaiju. That does its other effect would be if your opponent controls a Kaiju, which you're in control of doing, then you can special summon a Kaiju to your side of the field. So back to the importance of why the selection of Kaijus are important. So we've picked 2 Dogoran, because it's a 3k body. We've got 3 Gameciel, because it's a 2/2 body. And we're playing 1 Gardeler. So I would play more Gardeler. I'd consider dropping either a Gameciel or a Dogoran, to be honest, for a Gardeler, because it's a smaller body, but it's still a level 8, and the level 8 bit will be important later. So I'll explain the level 8 bit when I get to the spells. So, next up, we have the 1 Pankratops. So, if it wasn't obvious with all the Kaijus, this is very much a go second deck. You don't particularly care about your opponent setting up much of a board, because the whole point is you use your Kaijus, you use your spell cards, you use your monsters to break apart that board and then slowly poke away at them. Sometimes you don't even slowly poke away at them, but we'll get into the combos. Well, I say combos. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of it later. So we've got Pankratops. So what he does is, if your opponent controls more monsters than you, summon himself from hand. During either player's turn, which is a really nice effect, you can tribute itself to target and destroy a card on your opponent's side of the field. So that's really good at breaking through floodgates again. So if you, or any back row that you're worried about, literally anything you're worried about, Pankratops will deal with. It's great. Next up, we are indeed playing the Cyframe package. So the requirements for Gamma is, if you control no monsters and your opponent activates a monster effect, you can summon this card from hand and a driver from deck to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. The nice thing about the Yosenjus is, because they all come back to hand, you quite often end up having no monsters left on board. Sometimes you'll have a Kaiju, but that's not the end of the world, because they're gonna get rid of that Kaiju one way or another. It's not likely you'll end up with the Kaiju for very long. The other thing it's nice for is baiting your opponent's negates. So when you activate a spell card to start your turn, they're likely going to want to negate that. Gamma will be able to stop your opponent from negating the spell card, and then you'll be able to go off and combo freely. Next up, we're playing 1 copy of Gen X Ally Birdman. So this is actually a interesting spicy tech, thanks to my good old friend Adam. He showed me Birdman and explained how good it is. So for those who don't know what Birdman does, is you can target a monster you control, return it to hand to summon himself. That's about as much as he does, but he's much better than that. He's a level 3 tuner, which means we can go into big plays. Again, we'll be going over some of those plays later. And then finally, we play the one-of Mermare. So Mermare is just a token generator, which is great for when we are making our big plays. And then for the spells and traps, we are playing 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. So the extra deck is not particularly important in this deck. We're more worried about getting Kaijus and Yusenjus on board. Sometimes the extra deck is a bonus, sometimes the extra deck is pretty helpful for breaking apart the opponent's board, but do you know what's better than using the extra deck to break apart the opponent's board? Using Kaijus. Helping you dig for your Kaijus is really important. The only downside about Extravagance is you have to play it at the start of your main phase, and you can't draw additional cards for the rest of the turn, which means you can't use Isna's draw effect, and you can't use another card, which I'll go into later. Next up, we have 3 copies of Fire Formation Tenki. All of the Yusenju monsters are Beast Warrior type monsters, so you're able to search for any Yusenju monster you want, and they all get a 100 buff off of each of these. You can only play 1 Tenni per turn, but you want to see the Tenki card as soon as possible. Having that sort of plus, that advantage, really helps, so you definitely want this at 3. Next up, we play 3 copies of Kaiju Slumber. So, for those who don't know, this is a board wipe. It'll destroy all monsters on either player's field, and then special summon 2 Kaijus from deck. So, what you'll do is activate this and hope you've got a Gamma in hand, because being able to negate your opponent's negate with a Gamma is huge, and then you just wipe the board. The other thing that Slumber does, actually, before I forget, is whilst it's in graveyard, other than the turn it was sent there, you can banish it from grave to search for a Kaiju, which is definitely an underrated feature. You should definitely, because realistically you're not going to OTK with this deck, but you are going to really set them back and go for the long game. Having the ability to search for a Kaiju is great. Next up, we play 2 trade-in, which is why the specific Kaijus were important. They're all level 8s, which has synergy with trade-in. It's just more draw power to make sure you get into more Yusenjus, more Kaijus, more power cards. And to finish up the spell lineup, we play a one-of Dimensional Fissures. So, what is nice about this deck is all of your monsters come back to hand. You don't send anything to grave. Not many decks don't like, not many decks can play around this. They want to get rid of this as soon as possible, and that puts them on the back foot really quickly. This paired up with Yusenju, with Kaiju Slumber, or any Kaiju, is great. Really good. And lastly, our one-of trap card, very similar to Dimensional Fissure, is Macrocosmos. Onto the extra. So, for the extra deck, we are playing, again, the extra deck's not particularly important, which is why we're playing Extravagance in the deck. We are playing 1 Appaloosa. It's pretty easy to get out with the deck, considering how easy it is to summon Yosenju monsters. Just, if you're made to go first, it's not a bad card to play. We're playing 1 Borosaur Dragon, and some cards to go with it. IP, Link Rebo, and Link Spider. So the idea is you use Mermare to generate tokens, turn the tokens into an IP, Link Rebo, and Link Spider, or even just IP or Link Rebo or Link Spider, because the Mare is an effect monster itself, and then use those to go into Boral Sword and hopefully have enough to swing for game. Onto the XYZs, we are playing one Abyss Dweller, some really nice Floodgate. A lot of decks like using the graveyard. The graveyard is basically hand 2.0, so that's why we play Dweller. Baguska, again, we don't like going first. If we're made to go first, we want to slow down the gameplay as much as possible, and this allows us to turn effects on and off as we please. So that's a pretty nice start for us. Tornado Dragon for the back row that we're worried about, if we are worried about back row. It's not often that the extra deck comes up, to be honest, but it's nice having the versatility there if you need it. We also play the Utopia package. I would have a double or nothing and a Utopia double in here instead. I'm just waiting for that to turn up. We would be playing 3 Cowboy because cowboying for game is the most satisfying thing ever. But again, I've only got 1 Cowboy and 1 Samurai to cover. And then on to the Synchros, we're playing 1 Omega because we're playing the Gamma package, bit of a no-brainer. 1 Black Rose Dragon, in tandem with Gen X Ally Birdman. You can bounce a card to your hand, sync for a 7, and then just board wipe. Alternatively, you can make Yazi. So what Yazi can do is that's how you bring out your Mare. You target a card your opponent controls and itself, destroy both, and then its second effect is when it goes to grave, you can special summon 1 worm type monster from deck, and that will always be Mare. From there, you create 3 tokens, go into Link Spider or Link Rebo and IP, make your Boral Sword. So, some neat interactions with the deck. Right, so I'm going to describe them as interactions in the deck because I don't want people to think this is a combo deck. This is by no means a combo deck. There are just some fun interactions you can do with the combinations of cards that you have. So, as is the case with Pot of Extravagance, you have to activate this at the start of your main phase. This gives you a perfect opportunity if you've got Gamma in hand to bait the negate. That means if they try and Ash Blossom you, that means if they try and use any sort of on-field monster negate like Dragoons maybe, you can use Gamma to negate that. Sure, you have to banish 6's cost, but this is a huge play. It'll bring your driver out, and then you can go into Omega, you can link it off if you want link monsters, you can do so much with this. The other thing that's nice to go with Gamma is Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. So your opponent isn't going to want Interrupted Kaiju Slumber to resolve, naturally. So you can activate this if you've got a Gamma in hand, and they could Ash it, so Kaiju Slumber will try and summon from deck, which means your opponent can Ash it. You can use Gamma to stop that. Your opponent might have onboard negates that will allow it to stop that. Again, you can use Gamma to stop that. Gamma and Kaiju Slumber are best friends, don't get me wrong. If you do Chain Link 1 Kaiju Slumber, Chain Link 2 they activate some sort of negate, and then Chain Link 3 use Gamma, because it will resolve backwards, Gamma will summon both from deck, the negate will be negated, and then Slumber will board wipe, which means you don't get to keep your Gamma and Driver to go into further plays. But that is pretty insignificant considering how much of a huge plus that you gain from just those 2 cards. So another nice interaction is if you open with Slumber and any Kaiju. I know the Kaiju cards themselves state that you can't control more than one kaiju at a time, which means there's not a lot you can do to get around having another kaiju on your opponent's side of the field. But if you do have a kaiju and slumber in hand, you can kaiju their negate if they've only got one negate, or something that they're going to be able to use to stop the slumber from going through, and then activate slumber. This is quite a controversial topic because of the way that these two cards are worded. It shouldn't work, but it has been approved by some very important judges that if your opponent controls a kaiju, you can still slumber. In my opinion, that's because it says destroy all face-up monsters on the field and then summon a kaiju from deck. I can see the points either way, but I'm just grateful that this interaction does work because it means it's easier for you to break your opponent's boards. The other combinations which are particularly helpful is Yusenju Karma 1 and any kaiju is great. So obviously you're going to need another Yosenju monster to be able to use his other effects, or any of his effects. So let's say in this instance we've got Karma 3. You can kaiju their monster. Karma 1 effect lets you summon it again. Karma 3, because you control another Yosenju monster, his bounce effect is live, which means you can bounce the kaiju to hand, and then because your opponent doesn't control a kaiju, you can just summon it again. Thankfully, Yosenju Karma 1 isn't once per turn, so if you had 3 Karma 1 in hand and enough different Yosenjus, you would be able to summon your Gamma Seal many times. So, tribute your opponent's monster, summon 1, because his effect specifies that you need to summon a different Yusenju other than another Karma 1, you have to go for a different one. So Karma 3, again, this one states something different than itself, so you can't go for a Karma 3, but that's where you can summon 1 again, which is great because then you can go off for your bigger plays. Now with 3 Karma 1 on board, you can bounce, tribute again, bounce with this one, tribute again, and then bounce with this one. And then if you really need, tribute again. You can summon Gamma Seal up to 4 times hypothetically, getting rid of 4 monsters effectively for free. Another nice interaction between Karma 1 and any of your kaijus is you summon 1, you summon another Yusenju whilst your opponent controls a kaiju, and say you've got a trade-in hand. Normally it's quite a tough decision to decide, do you go digging for more cards first, or do you break your opponent's board? With Karma 1 you can effectively do both. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it's a bit rubbish drawing into more Yusenju cards after you've already normal summoned your Yusenjus, because you can't normal summon again. It's only immediately after the summon. But what you can do is Karma 1, any other Yusenju, bounce it to hand, you've started picking apart the board, then you can trade in to draw 2 cards. It's huge. So much synergy in this deck. So, onto the plays with Gen X Ally Birdman. There's a couple of different ways around you can do this. One of the best ways of doing this, again, courtesy of Adam for pointing this out, is you can slumber, and that'll bring out a kaiju on your opponent's side of the field and a kaiju on your side of the field. That's already quite a nice advantage. But on top of that, you can summon your Yusenju monsters as you would, and then use Birdman's effect to bring back Dogoran, or whatever kaiju you bring out on your side of the field, to summon itself. Because you now don't control a kaiju and your opponent does, you can still summon that Dogoran from hand. That's a free Gen X Ally Birdman, which not only does that mean it's a free Birdman, it's also a free Sync 7, which will get you into your Yazi plays, which also means you can go into an OTK at this point, because if you've board wiped and you're able to go into Yazi, you've got game. You can use Dogran and Boral Sword for game. So naturally, what if you don't have Slumber or 2 Kaijus, but you still want to go for that Yazi play? You can still do that with just the Yosenju monsters. So if you've got 2 different Yosenju monsters, you can 1, 2, Birdman to bring 1 back and summon, and then you've got your Yazi play again. That's the great thing about the Yosenju monsters, because they normal summon another one for free. You can build up your board and then use Birdman to break apart your opponent's board. Another thing about the Gamma package is there's a way you can trigger it if you haven't opened up any of your spells, and that's by using Isna. So if your opponent tries to negate Isna, when you discard it to prevent your opponent from responding, again, you've got no monster on field. Because you had to discard this rather than summon it, you can go off and use your Gamma to negate. That just about summarises the conclusion to the deck profile and a few interactions that the deck has. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you can see how powerful Rogue can be.